For years, the Victorian mansion atop Westcott Hill was little more than a silhouette in the foggy landscape of the small town of Greywick. Surrounded by ancient trees and a mist that never seemed to lift, the Ashcroft estate was one of those places townspeople preferred not to mention, not because they didn't know what went on there, but because they knew too much. If this story already makes you uneasy, perhaps you should subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the revelations to come are even more disturbing. My name is Daniel Fontes. I've been an investigative journalist for more than 14 years, and I thought I had seen it all. Unexplained disappearances, obscure cults, generations bound by silence. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I uncovered while investigating the grim legacy of the Ashcroft family. Between 1952 and 1991, 8 children were officially registered as adopted by members of the Ashcroft bloodline, all in different decades, different states, different circumstances. What unites these cases, however, defies logic and civil records. Not a single one of these children was ever seen attending school, participating in public life, or even receiving medical care, and no neighbor, resident, or acquaintance recalls ever seeing them. Only blurred photographs in old family albums, misspelled names in aged documents, and fragmented accounts, usually followed by a quiet warning, "Better not mess with the Ashcrofts." My interest arose by accident while investigating a series of abandoned properties mysteriously donated to Greywick City Hall in 2022. One of them, number 311 on Westcott Hill, led to a name I had encountered in previous, inconclusive investigations: Thomas Ashcroft, a name that surfaced in wills dated 1893, school records from 1927, and even an anonymous report shelved by the local prosecutor's office in 1975. Contrary to what I initially thought, this wasn't a straightforward genealogical line. It was a succession of repeated names, always Thomas, always Ashcroft, always involved in guardianship or adoption cases, but never leaving a trace of the children beyond the entry records. No death certificates, no school transfers, no adult photographs. Greywick is not a forgotten town. On the contrary, it's one of those places that clings to modernity with a respectable air of tradition. Perhaps for that reason, or perhaps something far more sinister, no one ever questioned what went on inside that mansion. But I did, and what I found behind the Ashcroft legacy, in locked basements, neglected archives, and the ashamed gazes of the elderly, went far beyond a simple case of disappearance. It was the revelation of a ritualistic ancestral cycle, carefully protected for decades. This is the macabre tale of the Ashcrofts, and it all begins with an unexpected inheritance. I arrived in Greywick on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, the kind that soaks through your coat no matter how tightly you fasten it. The town hadn't changed much since the last census in the late 1990s. At least that's what the locals said. Same streets, same storefronts, same families. Everything aging gracefully on the surface, though something beneath that surface felt prematurely decayed. The notice came through a firm in Providence. A man named Elijah Creel had left me an estate. No known relation, no prior contact. I had never heard of him before the letter arrived, printed on thick paper with a wax seal bearing the faint outline of a feathered eye. That eye would become all too familiar. The letter was formal, cold, and perplexing. You have been named sole heir to the Ashcroft estate in Greywick, Massachusetts, by wish of the late Elijah Creel. Instructions for transfer of ownership are enclosed. You are advised to claim the property within 60 days. I hadn't planned to accept, but something about the name struck me. I'd seen Ashcroft before, in a list of uninvestigated child disappearances compiled by a retired detective in 2008. Then again in a redacted mental health record from 1964. The name lingered in footnotes and margins, like an ink stain no one could quite wash away. The estate was perched at the very end of Westcott Hill, far beyond the last bus stop, and past several private property signs nailed to leaning posts. When I arrived, the gates were already ajar. Rusted hinges groaned as I pushed them open, and the overgrown gravel path crackled under my boots like bones under frost. The mansion stood like a mausoleum, 3 stories of soot-dark stone and slate shingles, with window panes fogged from within. A small brass plate next to the door read, "Ashcroft House, Est 1844. Inside, the air was heavier than I expected, not stale, more like something waiting to exhale. The floorboards moaned beneath me as I crossed the main hall, passing walls lined with portraits, all shrouded in black cloth. There was no dust, no signs of abandonment. Someone had been here, tending to the house, until very recently. The living room contained a single table with a folder placed dead center. No dust on it either. Inside were the deed, a hand-drawn floor plan, and a handwritten letter from Elia Creel. If you're reading this, then the blood is finally looped back to where it began. You'll find things beneath the house. Don't look for them unless you're ready to remember what was taken to make you. That night, I chose not to sleep. Instead, I began documenting every room, every creaking hallway, every sealed door. There were 9 bedrooms. 8 of them were furnished identically, simple with iron beds and faded rugs, each one with a child's name engraved into the wood above the headboard. Eleanor, Marcus, Lisbeth, Jonah, Clara, Vincent, Ruth, Samuel. Only the 9th room was different. It was bare, except for a mirror covered by a black velvet cloth. Carved into the wood just above it was the word, witness. In the cellar, I found the first sign of something deeper. Behind a loose panel in the wine rack was a narrow spiral stairwell leading down to what felt like a second foundation. The temperature dropped sharply as I descended. The space below was not listed on the floor plan, an undocumented sublevel made of stone and packed soil, lined with iron hooks on the walls. In the center, an altar, nothing ornate, just a large slab of granite, stained dark at its edges. Above it, carved into the ceiling beams, was a recurring phrase, "The 8 must remain unseen, so the 1 may always see." My hands trembled as I copied it into my notebook. The phrase would repeat, I would soon learn, in places far removed from this cellar. Documents, letters, margins of photographs. Back upstairs, I began comparing the floor plan to the house itself. One room on the drawing had no corresponding door. It was supposed to be between the study and the library, a 5-meter gap that in person was just wall. I knocked along the corridor, searching for hollow spots, and found none. Still, the math didn't lie. Something was walled off. I ended that night on the 3rd floor, seated before a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. The ash inside was old, but something was lodged beneath it, a half-burnt photograph. The image was faded, the faces blurred by heat, but one detail remained. 8 children in white nightgowns, facing away from the camera, with a tall man standing behind them. His face was turned to the side, almost profile, but the eyes had been scratched out violently, as if by a nail. Scrawled on the back in cursive, nearly illegible, "Summer Solstice, 1973. All accounted for. Keep them cold, keep them blind." I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. The house, I realized, wasn't just a relic. It was a container, and it had been sealed for decades, not to keep people out, but to keep something in. It was on the 3rd day that the documents began to emerge, not dramatically, but with quiet insistence. The house seemed to release them, as if it had waited long enough for someone willing to see. I found the first in the 2nd floor study, beneath the drawer of a false-bottom desk, sealed shut with a brass latch. A rusted key had been wedged inside an old book titled, "On the Renewal of the Soul Through Confinement." The book had no author, only the initials TA on the inside cover. Inside the drawer were several letters, folded into thirds and tied with black thread. The paper was brittle and yellowed. Each was dated, written in a tight, disciplined hand. January the 13th, 1953. The child called Eleanor is unwell. She speaks to the wall again. Says the shape behind the fireplace tells her what to draw. Must continue salt rituals nightly. Must cleanse with vapor and oil. June the 9th, 1958. Vincent cannot sleep. He bites his own tongue in the night and bleeds on the pillow. The stain took the shape of the feathered eye. Perhaps a sign, perhaps a warning. Must isolate him from the others until the next phase. The ink was faded, but the pattern was emerging. These were not parents, nor caretakers in any conventional sense. They were keeping records, ritual logs, detailing symptoms, phases, behaviors. In the attic I found trunks, 3 of them, each labeled with a child's name burned into the wood. Inside were belongings, hand-sewn clothes, toys made of carved bone, and in each, a notebook. The notebook marked Clara was different. It wasn't filled with ritual accounts, but drawings, repetitive ones, a house with no windows, a face without eyes, a tree with children hanging by their hands, not their necks. On the last page, a single phrase, "The blind see first." Pinned beneath it, a small braid of blonde hair tied with red thread. In the hallway outside the attic, I took down one of the shrouded portraits. Behind the cloth, the painting had been deliberately scraped, the figure's face erased, leaving only the outline of a child's body in a white garment. The artist's signature had been smudged, but was still faintly legible. T. Ashcroft, 1911. As I continued unwrapping portraits, a horrifying theme appeared. All the faces had been removed, not blurred or faded, removed. Some scraped away with a blade, Others burned out from behind the canvas, and beneath nearly every one, etched into the bottom frame in small Latin script, the same phrase, ex oculis, vita, from the eyes, life. The deeper I explored, the more the architecture of the house betrayed its purpose. In the servants' quarters, behind the back wall of the pantry, I discovered a narrow passage leading to a dead-end chamber. Inside, a stool faced a hole carved into the stone wall, leading to what looked like another hidden room, completely sealed. The only way to view it was through the hole, almost like a confessional or a voyeur's peephole. Through it, I could see a space with 8 small beds arranged in a circle, each with black cloth laid across it, and in the center, a 9th space, empty, surrounded by symbols chalked onto the floor, spiral shapes, concentric eyes, vertical lines representing bodies. That night, I found another diary, this one hidden inside the fireplace mantel in the room labeled Witness. The cover was black leather, embossed with a circle of thorns. The entries spanned decades, each year marked by the same date, June 21st. June 21st, 1921. Child Jonah wept during the binding. The others hummed the hymn as instructed. He will not last the season. June 21st, 1965. The 8th was given. The circle remains unbroken. I watch. I do not weep. I do not forget. June 21st, 1991. The last is sealed. The eye remains. If you read this, your breath belongs to them now. 1991. The year the adoptions stopped. The year the records went silent. The year Elia Creel vanished from public record. I searched for him. Birth records, census data, death certificate. Nothing. Only a photograph found in the rear library, folded inside a copy of Greywick Parish Histories. It showed 9 men standing in a semicircle around a stone altar. Their faces were intact. One of them bore an uncanny resemblance to me. On the back, a single line written in red ink. Blood comes home to blind the eye once more. The repetition was clear. 8 children in every generation. Ritual silence. Hidden rooms. A chamber made only to observe. A witness kept apart. And always, the same name behind the pen, Thomas Ashcroft. But the handwriting varied across documents spanning more than a century, unless it had always been the same man, or the same thing. By the end of my first week in Greywick, I had stopped introducing myself as a journalist. The moment I mentioned the name Ashcroft, doors began to close, sometimes literally. Smiles soured into warnings, and even the most harmless inquiries about property history or town records were met with, "Why do you want to know that?" Or worse, "Some things are best left." Still, I persisted, and slowly, some cracks in the town's polished silence began to appear. It started with a woman named Iris Bellamy, the oldest living member of the Greywick Preservation Council. She was 91 years old and blind in one eye, her gaze milky and unblinking. I caught her just outside the town chapel, where she sat most mornings knitting in silence. When I asked her about the Ashcrofts, she did not respond immediately. Then she whispered, "Don't say that name in front of the church. The stones remember it." We met again the next day, privately, in her garden behind the chapel. Surrounded by dead roses and empty bird cages, she finally spoke. There were always 8. Always. My mother worked as a cleaner in that house, back when Thomas, yes, that Thomas, was still pretending to be the mayor's cousin. Every 10 years or so, another child would arrive, never through the front gate. And after a few years, nothing. No farewells, no funerals, just silence. I asked why no one reported it. She smiled bitterly. Because Greywick was built on that silence. The town hall used to be a chapel. That altar, before they moved it into the Ashcroft cellar, was consecrated with blood. Iris gave me names, 3 of them, all now deceased, but all former officials, a registrar, a sheriff, and a school superintendent. Each had signed off on the adoptions, the property permits, the disappearances. The town records corroborated this, but only faintly. Files between 1946 and 1974 had been selectively purged. Pages were missing, dates redacted, but someone had been sloppy. A misfiled envelope in the library archives contained a carbon copy of a municipal order from June 22, 1968. In accordance with Covenant Code 43B, the Ashcroft property is exempt from juvenile census compliance until expiration of the custodial cycle. The phrase custodial cycle had never appeared in any Massachusetts legal document I could find. It was specific to Greywick. From the local newspaper, the Greywick Ledger, I tracked down a retired reporter named Paul Renner, now in a hospice just outside town. He was 96 and barely responsive at first, but when I showed him the carbon copy, he stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "We weren't allowed to print it." I wrote the piece, full page, names, dates, kids. Editor said, "You print that, they'll bury you in the quarry." And I believed him. According to Paul, the ledger's editor in 1973 received monthly payments from something called the Westcott Trust. I found only one trace of that trust, in a banking ledger listing transfers to Ashcroft Family Maintenance, C.C. Thomas A. Paul added one final detail. There's a room under the library, not in the blueprints, locked. They used to call it the vault. That's where the old town ledgers are, if they're still there. He died 2 days later. With the help of a local handyman named Carl, silent, nervous, but curious, I found the room beneath the library. It had once been a bomb shelter, then repurposed. The door bore no lock, only a circular indentation and a brass slot, a crest above it, a closed eye above a gate. Inside, the room was lined with iron drawers, ledger books stacked floor to ceiling, unpublished newspaper drafts, and photographs, dozens of them. Children in robes, rites performed at dusk, town officials observing, smiling, and in every frame, one man in the background, slightly different each time, different hats, beards, coats, but the same height, the same bone structure, and always labeled T. Ashcroft. One photo chilled me more than the rest. It was dated June 21, 2001. A girl no older than 9 stood in front of the Ashcroft house, looking directly into the camera. Her eyes had been scratched out with something sharp. Below the photo, in handwriting identical to the letters I had found in the mansion, the cycle missed one. Rectify before witness awakens. I brought this to the Greywick police. They told me there was no record of a missing girl in 2001. They claimed no knowledge of the Ashcroft Trust, no covenant code, no ledgers. I showed them proof. They returned the materials within 24 hours, claiming unverified origin. One officer warned me, "Stop digging, or you'll be the next ghost people forget." But some residents remembered. They remembered everything. They just weren't allowed to speak. It began with the door behind the wall. Carl, the handyman who had helped me find the vault, returned 3 days later with a crowbar and a plan. The false corridor I had mapped on the second floor, the one with no door and no sound behind it, had gnawed at me every night. He didn't ask questions, just said, if they bricked it, they were hiding something important. We broke through the plaster with slow, deliberate strikes. Behind it, not drywall but ancient stone, fitted together with a precision that predated the rest of the house. Symbols had been etched along the archway, spirals, broken circles, and above them a single word in Latin, reclusa, sealed. When we finally broke through, the stench hit first, earth, decay, and something coppery. The space beyond was colder than the cellar, a chamber carved directly into the rock beneath the hill. 12 alcoves lined the circular wall, each containing a small iron bed, rusted restraints, and symbols painted in dried blood. At the center of the room, an altar lower than the others. Carved into it was a perfect circle surrounded by 13 slashes. Only 12 were filled. Carl refused to step in. This place was meant to keep something still. I took photos. I documented everything. And then I noticed a recess in the far wall, an arch just tall enough to walk through. The path beyond led to a descending tunnel, sloped and narrow, with roots twisting down from the ceiling like veins. It felt alive. I reached a second chamber. Unlike the first, it had no beds, no symbols, just a wide floor covered in fine black sand, and in the center, an immense stone basin filled with stagnant water. Above it, hanging from rusted chains, a cage large enough to hold a child. The walls were covered in writing, not just Latin now, English, French, Hebrew, even runes, all saying the same thing. The witness returns. The eye will not sleep again. Bind the 8, complete the 13th. In that moment, everything fell into place. Each generation, 8 children, always 8, always unseen. A 9th child remained, untouched, unnamed in public record. The witness, someone meant to survive, someone meant to carry the knowledge or the burden. And Thomas Ashcroft, he wasn't a man. He was the vessel, the keeper, the ritualist, the face that observes. Each cycle, he absorbed something from the 8, their silence, their blood, their eyes, and he endured, not through science, not through magic as we know it, but through witnessing, feeding on the act of being seen by no one, becoming what the town required, the unseen observer of suffering, the guarantor of Greywick's prosperity. I climbed out of the chamber, shaken. Carl was gone. That night I returned to the house and found the mirror uncovered in the witness room. I saw myself, and behind me, him. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Thomas Ashcroft, older than the portraits, mouth closed, eyes wide, not blinking. The room went dark. When I awoke, it was morning. I was on the altar in the 13th chamber, blood trickling from a shallow cut on my hand. Around me, symbols drawn fresh in chalk, still wet. I ran. I drove out of Greywick. I didn't look back until I reached Boston. Back home, the documents I had collected had vanished from my bag. Only one remained. The burned photo of the 8 children with the man behind them, eyes scratched out. But now, there was a 9th figure in the image. Me, and under it, freshly written in red ink, "The cycle is sealed. The 13th is ready." I returned to Greywick 5 days later, not as a journalist, but as a threat. I had spent those days compiling copies, digital and physical, of everything I could preserve. Photos of the 13th chamber, scans of the diaries, transcripts of Iris Bellamy's testimony, the carbon copies from the municipal archives. I sent packets to newspapers, online forums, 2 trusted colleagues, and even a retired FBI analyst who had once investigated ritual killings in rural Maine. Only one responded, Dr. Karen Elsey, formerly of the Behavioral Analysis Unit. Her message was brief. "If this is real, you need to leave that town, immediately." But I didn't. I went straight to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. I submitted the evidence and filed a formal report. Ritualistic abuse, human sacrifice, concealment of bodies, municipal collusion. I expected disbelief. Instead, I received silence. 3 days later, I received a visit, not from law enforcement, but from a representative of the Greywick Historical Society, a man in a gray wool coat who introduced himself only as Mr. Hollow. He entered my apartment without invitation, sat without asking, and slid a sealed envelope across my table. "The Ashcroft estate," he said calmly, "was never meant to be disturbed. What you found is not yours to interpret." I opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no signature, only a phrase, "You are the 13th. The cycle must close." When I looked up, Hollow was gone. That same night, news broke in Greywick. A fire had consumed the Ashcroft mansion. Spontaneous, according to local reports. Electrical fault. No survivors, no remains. But I knew the house had no electricity. The wires had been gutted since 1987. The next morning I drove back to Greywick. The road to Westcott Hill was blocked by unmarked vehicles. Men in dark uniforms sifted through ash and stone. I wasn't allowed near. But across the street, by the old chapel, I saw Iris Bellamy one last time. She was wearing black. She held a photograph, charred at the edges. When I approached, she said only, "It never ends. We just build another house." In the days that followed, no national media reported the fire. No investigations were launched. My report to the state vanished from public records. The retired FBI contact stopped answering, but something had shifted. 2 weeks later, the Greywick School District quietly announced a restructuring. Several teachers were dismissed. The old registrar's office was shut down. The Historical Society's website was taken offline. And then I began to receive packages, photos, journals, letters from other towns, 8 towns to be precise, each with names: Eleanor, Marcus, Ruth, Lisbeth, Samuel, Vincent, Clara, Jonah, always the same names, always orphan records, always ending in nothing. Each had a Thomas Ashcroft, sometimes a teacher, a priest, a philanthropist, but always present. One town had buried a time capsule in 1951. When reopened in 2022, it contained a letter that read, "We gave the 8, we watched, do not dig again." I compiled everything. I submitted it to every major outlet, none published, until one blog, run by a collective of folklorists, took it. Their post went viral, but the next day, the site was deleted, all content gone, domain revoked. That same week, someone left an envelope under my apartment door. Inside, a small stone pendant in the shape of an eye. Beneath it, a note: "You were supposed to watch, not remember." That night, I had a dream. I was back in the 13th chamber. 12 figures stood in a circle, hooded, silent. A 13th stood in the center, me, and somewhere, behind the wall, someone whispered, "He sees now. He will not stop seeing." What began in Greywick did not end in Greywick. Within months of the mansion's destruction, similar structures, homes, chapels, orphanages, began appearing in the background of archived photographs from other New England towns, always tucked away, always poorly documented, always tied to names that vanished from public record after 1 or 2 generations. I started mapping them, 8 towns in total, forming a perfect octagon around central Massachusetts. At the center, Greywick. In Ramsden, a forgotten coal town, I found a crumbling school building with 9 dorm rooms, 1 sealed. In Halber, a decommissioned sanatorium contained a ritual circle carved beneath the floor of the hydrotherapy chamber. In Marrow Creek, An abandoned church had records of 13 lost baptisms every decade, 8 named, 5 erased. Each town had a file. Each town had an Ashcroft. By now, I was no longer working alone. A group of journalists, historians, and one ex-seminarian joined the effort. We formed a closed research circle online. We called it Project 13. The more we uncovered, the more deliberate it became. In municipal charters, phrases repeated: custodial conduits, silent cycles, ocular witness. In school rosters, we found missing years with no enrollment records. In death registries, 8 children per decade with burial locations marked only as off-grounds. We traced funding patterns, local trusts, feeding cultural institutions, hospitals, even small museums, all with one signature routing number linked to a long-defunct account, Ashcroft Holdings, Steer 1844. The FBI refused to acknowledge the reports. One contact at the Library of Congress flagged a banned text titled Lux in Obscura, The Covenant of 13 Eyes. It had been pulled from circulation in 1932. Only one copy remained, sealed in a restricted archive under Mithraic derivatives. The text described a ritualistic system built around the preserved observer, a being who absorbs lineage, memory, and identity from those unseen to perpetuate the watching of the watcher. Each cycle, it said, must include 8 offerings, unseen, unnamed, 1 witness, remembered, unseen by others, 1 preserver, the vessel of continuity, 13 markers over 13 generations, and then a prophecy. When the 13th witness speaks, the silence ends not in fire, but in mirrors. Our research began to surface in obscure corners of the internet, podcasts, blog threads, fringe forums, always met with fascination and fear. Then came the deaths. One researcher fell from a 4th-story window, ruled accidental. Another vanished while driving to interview a town archivist in Halber. A third was found drowned in a dry lake bed in Ramsden. Their notes were erased, their devices wiped clean. But we had backups. We rebuilt the archives on secure servers, and slowly, the pattern became irrefutable. The Ashcrofts were not a family. They were a function. Each new generation inherited a role, not biologically, but ritually. A child chosen, groomed, hidden, made to watch, made to forget, and if they remembered, they burned. We began hearing from others, people who had never heard of Greywick, but recalled fragments. I was the only kid in my orphanage not adopted. There was a man who lived in the attic. He never left, but he always watched. I had a dream about a circle of beds and no doors. The echo was expanding. Then, in 2024, a development company filed permits to build Ashcroft residences in northern Vermont. Their logo? A closed eye above a gate. We submitted injunctions, protested, released documents. Nothing stopped it. The project broke ground on June 21st, and when the cornerstone was laid, witnesses claimed the man overseeing the ceremony looked no older than 40. His name? Thomas Elijah Ashcroft. We captured video. The footage was blurred, not by error, by something else. A presence in the lens, a warping of light, the same distortion we saw in every photo taken of the ritual spaces, as if the eye was not just watching, but feeding. Our team went dark for a month. No posts, no publications, no interviews. We needed time. Then, one of us, an archivist from Quebec, sent a final message before disappearing. It's not about stopping the cycle. It's about being the last to see. I live differently now. Mirrors are covered. Photographs face the wall. I no longer accept mail I didn't request, and I haven't said the word Ashcroft aloud in over 6 months. Until now. But I had to finish this. I had to speak it one last time because if I don't, someone else will. Someone who doesn't yet know the pattern, the names, the silence. Someone who might answer a letter, unlock a cellar, or stare too long into a mirror without knowing what's on the other side. I've seen the ledger. The 13th cycle is not the end. It is the beginning of a new diagram, a second ring, and if left to grow, it will not stop at 8 towns, or 8 children, or 1 witness. It will keep spiraling, and we, all of us who remember, are responsible for stopping the spiral. I've kept copies of every document, hidden in places no one looks, church basements, decommissioned archives, encrypted drives scattered across state lines. If you're listening to this, and you've found one, you're now part of it. Maybe that's why they left the chamber open, why the house burned after I left, and not while I was inside. Maybe I wasn't chosen to be the 13th. Maybe I was chosen to warn the 14th. If this story impacted you, don't let it disappear like so many others. Like the 8, like Clara, Vincent, Ruth, Jonah, Lisbeth, Marcus, Eleanor, Samuel, like me, like the one who watched, like the one who never stopped watching, like Thomas. If this story moved you, don't let it vanish. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There are many other names that still need to be remembered.